The trenches were alive again that morning, not with gunfire, but with rain. Heavy, unrelenting rain that turned the earth into a churning sea of mud. The smell of wet gunpowder, rust, and rock clung to every breath. Private Thomas Avery sat hunched in the corner of his dugout, his helmet resting beside a candle stub that flickered weakly against the damp. His hands, raw and cracked, moved slowly across a small scrap of paper. He was writing another letter. He always began the same way. Dearest Anna. He never knew how to finish. There were already more than a dozen of them stacked neatly in his kit bag, letters written but never sent. Words that would never cross the channel. Promises that would never be read. Outside, the men cursed the rain and the endless waiting. The war had quieted along their sector, but Thomas knew silence was only the breath before another storm. Sergeant Webb's voice broke through the dull patter of rain. Avery. You on letter duty again? Who you writing to, your sweetheart? Thomas looked up, smiling faintly. Why? She's probably forgotten what I look like by now. Webb chuckled, slapping the side of the trench wall. That's the war for you. By the time we get home, they'll all think we're ghosts. Thomas didn't reply. He folded the letter carefully, pressing it flat before tucking it into the pocket of his coat. He never sealed them, somehow, that felt final. The sound of boots splashing down the trench made both men turn. Corporal Harris appeared, drenched to the bone, carrying the post bag. Mail call, lads, he shouted, his voice strained against the rain. If your girl still remembers your name, you might get lucky today. The men gathered around, their faces lighting up at the faintest hope of home. Letters were gold, warmth in paper form. Harris tossed out envelopes one by one. Miller. Dawes. Jenkins. Then, with a smirk, Avery, you've got one. Thomas froze. He hadn't received a letter in months. He took it with trembling fingers, staring at the handwriting, looping, elegant, unmistakable. Anna. He read it slowly, every word sinking deep. My dear Thomas. The days are longer now, though the garden still feels empty without you. Mother says I should stop waiting by the window, but I can't. The postman's footsteps are the only sound that makes my heart race anymore. Please come home safe. Promise me you'll come home. Thomas swallowed hard. His chest tightened. For a brief, precious moment, the mud, the rain, the war, all of it, faded away. But then the sound of distant artillery broke the quiet. The front was stirring again. Webb's voice came from above the trench. Move it, Avery. We're on standby. B Company took a hit east of the ridge. Pack up. Thomas folded Anna's letter, pressing it to his lips. Then he tucked it into his breast pocket, close to his heart, and picked up his rifle. The trench erupted into motion. Men scrambled, shouted, loaded weapons. The rain turned the earth into a brown, sucking pit that clung to their boots as they climbed the ladders and rushed toward the line. The barrage began before they even reached it, shells screaming overhead, the sky flashing white. Thomas hit the ground, mud splashing his face. The world was thunder and chaos. Beside him, Webb was yelling orders, but Thomas couldn't hear them. All he could think of was that letter, the ink still fresh, the paper still warm. They advanced through smoke and shellfire, every step a prayer. The line was chaos, bodies, screams, explosions, the kind of madness that no man could ever explain. Hours later, when the guns finally fell silent, the ridge was theirs again. But the cost was unbearable. The medics were already shouting for stretchers. Thomas stumbled through the debris, his rifle gone, his hands shaking. He saw Webb lying against a crater edge, his leg twisted unnaturally. Webb, he called, dropping beside him. The sergeant grinned through blood. You still in one piece, Avery? Barely. Then count yourself lucky, Webb murmured, his voice fading. Tell the lads, tell them to hold the line. And then he was gone. Thomas sat there for a long time, rain washing over him, the sound of men moaning all around. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the letter Anna had sent, now smeared with mud and blood. The paper tore slightly in his trembling hands. He wanted to write her back. To tell her he was alive. To tell her he still thought of home. But when he reached for his pencil, he found it snapped in two. He looked down at the mud, at the letters he carried for months, now soaked, scattered, ruined. Words meant for a woman who might never know what became of him. The next morning, when the burial detail came through, they found Thomas Avery lying beside a shell crater, his hand clutching a letter addressed to Anna. It was never sent. The letter was never sent. It lay in the mud beside him for 3 days before the burial detail came through. The paper was half soaked, the ink blurred, but somehow, his name was still legible on the corner. Private Thomas Avery. When the men gathered the fallen, they placed his body with the others, neatly, silently, as if tidiness could hide tragedy. One soldier, a quiet lad from Manchester named Ellis, noticed the letter in Thomas's hand. He gently took it, brushed the dirt from it, and slid it into his breast pocket. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. Weeks later, that same letter would find its way back to England, tucked among official documents, casualty reports, and condolence forms. The war machine didn't pause for grief, it simply stamped it, sorted it, and sent it by train. In a small town on the English coast, Anna Harper stood by her window, as she always did when the postman came down the lane. The garden outside was barren now, winter had stripped it bare, leaving only the skeletal stems of what used to be roses. When the knock came, she felt it before she heard it. That strange weight in the air, heavy, suffocating. The postman, an older man with kind eyes, held his cap in his hands. "Miss Harper?" Her heart sank. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. "I'm sorry, miss," he said quietly, handing her the envelope with the official seal. "It's from the War Office." Anna nodded, her throat tightening. She closed the door gently behind her, walked to the kitchen table, and sat down. The envelope trembled in her hands. Inside was a letter typed in clean, impersonal lines. "We regret to inform you that Private Thomas Avery was killed in action on the Western Front." Her breath caught. The words blurred. She pressed her hand over her mouth, a sob escaping before she could stop it. The sound filled the empty house, echoing off the walls like a ghost. She read the letter again and again, as if repetition might change the ending. Then, a week later, another envelope arrived, smaller, without a seal. The handwriting was unfamiliar. "Dear Miss Harper, I was with Private Avery's unit. I found this among his things. I thought you ought to have it." Inside was the letter Thomas had never sent. The paper was worn, water-stained, and faintly smelled of smoke. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. "Dearest Anna, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you. The world has gone mad out here, and some days, I think we all have too. But when the guns fall quiet, I think of you. I think of the garden, and how you used to hum while you worked. I've seen things I can't put into words. But you should know, in the middle of it all, you're what keeps me human. If I don't make it home, promise me you'll keep living. Don't wait by the window forever. Grow old, laugh again. Find light, even if I'm gone. All my love. Thomas." By the time she finished, her tears had soaked the page. She folded it back carefully, pressing her lips to the paper before setting it on the table beside the official notice. For a long time, she just sat there, listening to the wind through the eaves. That night, she lit a candle and took out all of his old letters, every one he had sent before the silence. Dozens of them, worn from being read too often. She arranged them neatly on the table, a paper trail of love across time. Then she took a blank sheet and began to write. "My dearest Thomas, I received your letter. You were right, the garden has come back to life. I planted new roses last spring. They are small, but they are trying. I suppose that's all any of us can do now, keep trying. I miss you more than words can say. But I'll keep my promise. I'll live. For both of us." She placed her letter in an envelope, addressed it to him, and laid it on the windowsill. The next morning, she tied it with a ribbon and tucked it inside his old box of keepsakes. The box stayed there for years, untouched, gathering dust, until the war finally ended. 20 years later, long after the guns had gone quiet, the town erected a small monument for its fallen sons. Names carved in stone, each one a life cut short. Among them, Private Thomas Avery. Anna, now older, her hair streaked with silver, stood before the monument in the soft light of dawn. In her hands, she held the box. Inside were the letters, his, hers, and the one he never sent. The wind carried the faint scent of roses from the garden. She smiled faintly, touching his name on the stone. "You kept your promise, Thomas," she whispered. "Now it's my turn to keep mine." She knelt, placing the box at the base of the monument. Then she straightened, wiping her eyes. As she turned to leave, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the field in gold. For a moment, she thought she heard his voice, faint, almost carried by the wind. "Thank you, Anna." She paused, looking back one last time. The monument stood silent, unchanging, but to her, it felt alive. The letters were finally home. The years rolled onward, and the war that had once consumed the world faded into memory, its scars buried under cities rebuilt, its names etched into stones most people passed without reading. The world had moved on. But in one quiet home by the English coast, a box of letters still waited. It sat on a high shelf in a narrow attic, tucked beneath an old wool blanket, forgotten through time. Dust had settled over it like ash, the ink within fading into sepia ghosts. Until one summer morning in 1963, when a boy named Henry Whitlock, barely 17, stumbled upon it. He was helping his grandmother, Anna Harper Whitlock, clean out the house she had lived in for more than 50 years. The attic was warm and smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Light streamed through the small round window, illuminating motes that danced in the air. "Gran?" Henry called, brushing cobwebs from an old trunk. "What's this box?" "It's got your name on it." Anna, slower now but still sharp-eyed, climbed the stairs carefully, leaning on her cane. "Which one, dear?" He turned the box so she could see the faded handwriting. "T. Avery." Her face softened. "Ah," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she touched the lid. "That's not just any box, my love. That's the past." Henry raised a brow. "Who's T. Avery?" She smiled faintly. "A soldier. A man I once knew very well." "Were you in the war?" "In a way," she said softly, lowering herself onto an old chair. "But he was the one who fought it." Henry hesitated, unsure if he should pry. But curiosity got the better of him. "Can I open it?" Anna nodded. "Yes. I think it's time someone did." He unlatched the box gently, the hinges creaking as it opened. Inside were letters, dozens, maybe hundreds, bundled with ribbons, yellowed at the edges, some torn, some stained with old watermarks. At the very bottom lay one letter that looked different, darker, dirt-streaked, as if it had traveled through a storm. Henry picked it up and began to read. The handwriting was looping, careful, clearly written by candlelight. "Dearest Anna." He looked up. "Is this from him?" Anna's eyes glistened. "Yes. The last one he ever wrote." Henry read on, his voice soft but steady. "If I don't make it home, promise me you'll keep living. Don't wait by the window forever." When he finished, he sat in silence. The room seemed to hold its breath. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know you lost someone." Anna smiled sadly. "Most of us did, in those days. We just learned to live with the silence." He reached for another bundle, untying the ribbon. The letters inside were hers, written in elegant script, addressed to Private Thomas Avery. Did he ever read them? Henry asked. "No," she said. "But I like to think, somehow, he heard them anyway." She gazed out the attic window, watching the sunlight spill across the garden below, the same garden Thomas had once written about. The roses were in bloom again, vivid and alive. Would you like to know how we met? She asked suddenly. Henry nodded eagerly. So she told him about the seaside dances before the war, the telegrams, the first letters exchanged. How she'd waited for months without word. How the world had changed the day his last message arrived. Her voice trembled, but there was peace in it now, the kind that comes from finally speaking aloud what's been held inside too long. When she finished, Henry sat quietly, staring at the letters spread out before them. Then, slowly, he began to gather them into order. You should share this, he said. People should know what it was like, what love meant back then. Anna chuckled softly. And what would I call it, He thought for a moment. Letters never sent. Her smile deepened. Yes, that's perfect. 2 years later, after Anna's passing, Henry kept his promise. He compiled the letters, along with excerpts from her journals, and published them in a small collection. It was never meant to be famous, just a tribute, a whisper across time. But somehow, the story spread. Reviewers called it a haunting portrait of love and loss in the Great War. Historians praised its authenticity. Readers wept over the final pages. And one cold November morning, Henry stood before the monument in the town square, the same one Anna had once visited, holding a single red rose. He knelt and placed the book beneath Thomas Avery's name.